Which is better, a passport book or a passport card? We'll talk about it right after this. Hey, what's up everybody? Tony with Lido, Loca. Welcome to the YouTube channel. If you're new here and you enjoy travel, consider subscribing with the notification bell on, and that way you don't miss on any of our content. So we've made several videos here on the channel talking about why you should use a passport as your main form of identification, particularly when you go cruising. Inevitably, in almost every one of those videos, there's at least one comment that references the passport card. A lot of times the question is, should I use the passport book or the passport card? I've seen people that say I only use the passport card. So what I want to do in this video is give you a little bit of history behind the passport card, talk about the differences between the passport card and the passport book, and then wrap it up and tell you what I think you should use when you go traveling abroad. So before we jump into it, just so there's no confusion, the passport book looks like this. It has several pages in it. It has your picture and all of your pertinent information. And again, it has multiple pages. I don't have a passport card, but the passport card is about the size of a credit card or a business card. And so this is the difference that you're looking at. You can either carry a book with several pages, or you can carry just a single credit card size piece of identification. Just looking at it right here, you can see why the passport card is popular. So the passport card is a fairly new form of identification. It came into existence in 2008 primarily in response to the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative. That's the WHTI. And what the WHTI is a set of regulations that determines what types of identification individuals can use to cross the borders. Now, just a quick personal story. I went to Canada back in 1989, and all I had to provide was my Indiana birth certificate. There used to be a thing where you could just show up at the border and declare what citizen you were. You could show up at the Canadian border and say, I'm a US citizen. You could come back to the US, make that claim, and then they could determine through questioning whether or not you could enter the border. Now, of course, with the terrorist attacks in 2001, so many things changed, and the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative was a result of planning and new regulations that came after the terrorist attacks on 2001. And with the implementation of the WHTI initiatives, it made it more difficult for individuals in North America to cross the borders by land and sea. Essentially, it required that everyone would need a passport to make that border crossing, where in the past, other forms of identification would do it. Let's break it down a little bit. It is somewhat smart. There are 50 states in the United States, each with a different governing body that produces identification, such as birth certificates and driver's license and those kind of things. So at the borders, you have a federal agency that have the customs officials there. They now have to be familiar with the ins and outs of 50 different sets of identification. And it was really a mess. And that is really why the WHTI said, look, there just needs to be one standard form of documentation, and that is the passport. What is interesting is in the United States, culturally, we don't usually get passports. Many people never travel outside of the United States, and there's no documentation required to travel between state to state. If you think of the geography of the United States, it's a vast land, of course, 50 different states that you can go to, territories down in the Caribbean. And so for most people who don't ever leave the continental United States, you can just drive from state to state without any requirement for identification. It is different in Europe, where many times the size of European countries are the size of our states. And so when you go from one country to the next, you definitely need documentation. Over in Europe, they have identification cards and they also have passports. So now, because of these new regulations, people in the United States are presented with this interesting quandary. If you want to go to Canada, if you want to travel abroad, you now have to buy a passport. And many people don't have passports, and so the cost for the passport is $110 with a $35 fee that goes along with that. So $145 to get a 10-year passport. And once the WHTI came along, I think folks thought that maybe this was too cost prohibitive for people that were only traveling in the Western Hemisphere by land. So you have the birth of the passport card. The passport card is much cheaper. It's $30 with a $35 activation fee, and it allows you to make those land and sea border crossings. So very specifically, the passport card allows for domestic air travel within the United States, and it allows for exit and entry by land and sea to any of the WHTI members. Now I'll pop a list up of what those countries are that you can use the passport card for land and sea travel, but the big deal here is that you can only use it for air domestically in the United States. It does beg the question, which is better, the passport book or the passport card? For travel internationally that involves air flight, the passport book is absolutely essential. If you are going to fly somewhere outside of the US, you need a passport book. The passport card, again, is good for any of these nations that are in the WHTI. Those are Western Hemisphere nations. So for instance, if you were going to get on a ship, which is sea travel, and go over to Europe, you are going to need the passport book because the European nations are not a part of the WHTI. It also raises another interesting issue when it comes to Caribbean cruises. Most of the time you can go on a Caribbean cruise with just your birth certificate. That's something the industry's done, again, to keep costs down. But if you have made the investment into a passport or a passport card, the question is, does the passport card do enough for you when it comes to Caribbean cruises? For the most part, yes. If you get on the cruise ship, say in a port in Florida, and you go to a Caribbean island and you get back on that ship from the Caribbean island and go back to Florida, no big deal. You can use that passport card to exit and enter the United States. The only challenge is if something happens to you on your cruise and you have to fly back, you cannot use the passport card for that. So to me, the passport book when it comes to cruising is the best form of identification, but it really is a just in case. It is an insurance policy to say, for some reason you miss the ship, if you have to be put off the ship for a medical reason, if you have to be put off the ship because you've misbehaved, if you get stuck anywhere in one of these Caribbean islands, you will not be able to fly home with the passport card. I just want to mention real quick right here that there are islands in the Caribbean that are U.S. territories like Puerto Rico and St. Thomas. Those do follow the domestic rules, so you could use your passport card to fly in and out of Puerto Rico, for example. You can even use traditional documentation like your state issued ID to make that trip to Puerto Rico. But everything else, if you go to Cuba, if you go to Jamaica, anything that's not a U.S. territory, you cannot use the passport card to fly out of there. The passport book is required. I do want to mention the cost again of the passport and the passport card. $110 for the passport book, $30 for the passport card. Both of them have a $35 activation fee. You can, when you get your passport, you can also get your passport card at the same time for a discounted rate. So really maybe the best of both worlds. One of the reasons I wouldn't mind having a passport card for domestic travel is it does not publish your personal information. So if you look at most state issued driver's license, it's going to have your address, those kind of things. The passport card does not have your address. And so it is a really reliable form of identification that you can move with air inside the United States and not have to expose your personal information to strangers. I like the passport card for that. And of course the size makes it hard to not have. The only thing for me is I am worried that something could go wrong on my cruise, and so I don't think I would be comfortable using the passport card as my only form of identification when I go cruising. Birth certificates are a whole nother thing. You do run into that same issue if you have to fly back. You cannot fly back to the United States with your birth certificate. We did make a video on why you should get a passport for cruising. I will leave a link to that in the description and in a card above. I hope that clears up any questions you have about the passport book versus the passport card. But if you do have questions, please leave them in the comment below. And let me know, when you got your passport, did you get the passport card? Do you like the passport card better? Let's continue the conversation there. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up button, consider subscribing, follow all of our social media. This is Tony with Lido, Loca, and until the next time, we'll see you on the Lido. Bye.